They are just lying. Or, you know, if they're not intentionally lying, they are spreading misinformation. Here is Woody Harrelson talking about AZT. I mean, he's been pretty whack, but
I really hope he's able to do some good things because he's certainly a man on a mission and a man who cares
and what is this hat? What is this hat?
deeply.
Yeah.
And I think really heroic how much he stood up for things that he didn't need to talk about, you know, that didn't help him in any way. You know, He just took one arrow after the other over it. You know, to me, even if he was wrong, which I don't think he was, then it's heroic to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, and he wasn't wrong. The thing is like, I was a victim of that propaganda, and I told him that when I met him and I had him on the show. I said, I always thought you were a kook. I had always heard, I'd bought into it. I just had this sort of cursory examination of what people were saying about you. Like, oh, that guy doesn't believe in vaccines. He's a nut. He's some sort of an
They're talking about RFK, I think.
Science nut who's just a conspiracy theorist. He's just...
Yes, and that's exactly what he is. You should just clip this out where he's like, he's an anti-vax nut, anti-science conspiracy theorist. That's what he is.
Like all these other nutty people.
Right.
And then I read his book, and I was like, okay, well, this book is real. Why isn't he getting sued? If it's not real. If it's not real, why...
This is who tens of millions of people listen to. That is the logic that he's working with here. If he didn't get sued, which, yes, he has been sued, okay? But his argument is, well, he didn't get sued, so therefore this must be true. It's so bird-brained. It's so stupid. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who are consuming this and who are full-blown anti-science. I was talking to my mom about this, and I'm like, you know, the crazy thing is, it wasn't that long ago that being anti-vax, right, espousing these beliefs that are very antagonistic to science, that basically you don't believe science, okay? You don't believe science. That was fringe. That it was like the Jenny McCarthy's, who everybody knew was a vaccine conspiracist and was crazy. Like, Jenny McCarthy was not taken seriously. She and the other, you know, usually kind of tended to be the wealthy, white, like, female celebrities who, you know, or adjacent celebrity who were engaged in this kind of stuff. And then it started to become normalized because you have political candidates who say all this shit. Yeah, like the crystal mommy, right? To the point now that I know way too many people who are reading RFK Jr.'s books. I know someone who's going to have a baby, and she sent in our group chat a picture of RFK Jr.'s book and was like, I'm learning a lot from this. Why? Why are you reading this? And the question is, like, how does someone like that end up in this place where they are about to have their first child, and the what they are consulting is RFK Jr.'s book? That's what they're reading to prepare for having a child. Like, how did we get here? We're so fucking cooked, dude. How did we get here? And this is just an example of how mainstream and normalized these insane anti-vax, anti-science, conspiracy fucking psychoticness has become. And how many people are so vulnerable to believing this. Like they tried to kill Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci became like this symbol of evil for a lot of people on the right to make stuff up about. Do Joe's guests ever push back? Feels like a space with many easily agreeable guests. I mean, only if you bring on like a Bernie Sanders. But yeah, we have a whole content creator economy of content creators that push this anti-science stuff. They're, just the way that the internet is dominated by, and podcasts are dominated, the media dominated, alternative media dominated by these anti-science pushers, and how now it is no longer this fringe thing because it is so mainstream. Now, obviously, there are still a lot of people who believe in science, who have not fallen down this hole. But it is scary to see how it moved away from the fringes and towards the center, and how Robert Kennedy is, he's the head of Health and Human Services. Like, this is a guy who has caused a lot of damage, and anyway.
Why is he getting sued? Why if all these things he's saying about Anthony Fauci during the AIDS crisis, if that's not true, why is he not getting sued? I would sue the fuck out of him if he lied about me and said I was vaccinating foster kids with experimental drugs that were killing them. I would sue you if that was not true. Like, hey, you fucking liar, I never did that.
This is also just the most American thing too. It's like, okay, in America, we love to sue. And so that is an indicator to Joe Rogan on whether or not somebody is a liar.
This is a lie. You can't prove, but it's not a lie. And
if it was a lie, he'd get sued. If it being truth, they just ignored it.
Yeah.
But man, that is
like
a heavy tone.
I'm sorry, because I know every time we watch stuff like this, it kills your brain cells. But it is important to understand it's important to know that this is being said, right? Joe Rogan has a massive podcast. We know. We've talked so much about Joe Rogan. These two dumbasses going on this podcast that millions of people listen to, saying what they're about to say here, which is that AZT caused people to die. And AZT, which was pushed by Fauci, and Fauci, then by doing so is responsible for the deaths of a lot of men in the 80s. And this is straight up misinformation.
Yeah.
Oh my God. There's some info in there just blew my mind. You know, like the way Fauci was able to get these principal investigators from like all these respectable colleges and put them on these committees that ended up saying, yeah, this is the vaccine we'll use. This is we'll use AZT. He started with the AZT thing.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so AZT, if you don't know, AZT is an antiviral medication. It's still used, but it was the first drug that was used to treat AIDS. And it did not fix the problem, but it helped prolong the lives of so many people who had AIDS. And because of that, then they were able to like find a cocktail of drugs, other drugs that would actually effectively keep people with AIDS from dying. And so AZT is still used today in combination with other drugs. There's like 40 something AIDS related, HIV related drugs. And the good news is that today, if you are diagnosed, there is a very low possibility that it will result in your death, as opposed to in the 80s during the full-blown AIDS crisis, when a diagnosis meant sure death. And So what Woody is saying, what Joe and Woody are saying here, these fucking dumbasses, is they are saying that AZT killed a lot of people with AIDS. They're saying that the drug itself, which was which was pushed by the evil Dr. Fauci, and that's why they're talking about RFK, because he has said all these, he said all these things. They're just they are at worst lying, because that denotes intent, right? That they know that they're wrong and they're lying about it. Or I guess at best, just they're stupid and they don't have the correct information. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if like the malintent is there, because it's still wrong. Like, this is still not correct information. They're doing the thing where they believe the last thing that they heard. Yeah, I mean, it's like, oh yeah, well, I read this and blah, blah, blah. I read that in the U.S. in 2023 to 2024, about 20% of kids didn't get vaccine, which protects against measles and mumps, etc. Yeah, or how, things like polio are popping up again. We're like, we eradicated that. What is happening here? So I just, my thinking is that these two are just fucking stupid, okay? And they are not people. They are not people who genuinely seek out good sources of information. I mean, look at his hat, okay? A good source of information would have told him, don't wear that hat. So they're just like making whatever up. They're taking they're like the type of people who take anecdotes and then present that as fact. So I don't think that they actually understand something like HIV and like the history of HIV treatment. I don't think that they're knowledgeable that way. But again, it doesn't matter, because it's still the same result. They are still spreading false information that is being consumed by millions of people who are primed to believe that science is lying to them, that scientists are evil, that they shouldn't vaccinate their children, that they don't need to wear sunscreen because they just need to not eat seed oils, that like all of these new age wellness shit that's being given to them, right? Like, we got to take fluoride out of the water.
Yeah.
And, AZT was known to be a highly toxic, really ineffective drug.
Yeah.
And, of course, but
that is, like, this is false.
That was the one they picked, and so they started using that again, and I don't know how many people that killed. That killed friends of mine, AZT was very toxic, and they finally had to...
No, your friends died from AIDS.
Yank it.
Yeah.
And now they use different chemical cocktails, but like Fauci did some extraordinarily evil shit. And he knows what he did.
And when he says there, when he's like, now they got other cocktails, they still use AZT. Now, let me say, okay, because I don't have time to get into like all of it. AZT was not perfect. No. And there were certainly problems with how the FDA like rushed through the trials. Okay. Let me be clear about that. But this is false and dangerous information to say that AZT killed all of these people, killed Woody's friends, and that Dr. Fauci had evil intentions. Like, they are misrepresenting AZT, and also what AZT did in the search to find a cure for AIDS. I want to read this person's tweet. I worked on an inpatient AIDS unit in 1994. AZT was all we had. It kept a lot of people alive for a lot longer than they would otherwise have had. Joe Rogan and Woody Harrelson exhibit a willful, belligerent ignorance I find hard to comprehend. It's like they love being stupid and wrong. So, you know, I just am... I am concerned that there are so many things like this where neither Woody nor Joe are scientists. They do not have a science background. It's not like there is somebody who is much more knowledgeable there to do any type of pushback whatsoever. Everything Woody says, Joe Rogan is like, yeah, yeah, and because there's no correcting, because there's and the thing is, remember, conspiracies, false information, false beliefs surrounding science, surrounding like medicine and treatments and stuff, there's always a grain of truth to it. And so they'll point to that and be like, see, we were right. And so the truth being that AZT was far from a perfect medication, that there were unfortunate side effects, but it was the only thing that they had, and that it did prolong a lot of people's lives where they otherwise would have been much shorter. And AZT was not the, it was not the cure for AIDS. It was simply almost like a placeholder, and they needed to find a cocktail of other medications that would actually cure symptoms and keep people from dying en masse. And so today there are many, many drugs that are available for people who have AIDS, and AZT is still used often in treatment. But going back to the whole always a grain of truth about things, that's where it begins. And so they'll point to something where it's like, okay, yes, that is true. But it's the way then that they'll distort it or go down this path that then is so dangerously wrong. Freckles, thank you for the tier 1. And the other thing too is now it's this conflation of big pharma, right? Like the capitalist entities whose concern is profit, with science and with scientists. And it's, for people in this camp, like the Joe Rogan, Woody Harrelson, conspiracy theorists, anti-vaccine camp, they are not calling out the predatory, capitalistic endeavors of big pharma companies. What they are is like just total anti-science. And so it's tough because on the one hand, sure, big pharma is absolutely, there's absolutely historically been a lot of really terrible bad things that big pharma is responsible for. But that is not the same thing then as turning around and going, see, Dr. Fauci and these other scientists, they are evil. They cannot be trusted. These treatments, they're lying to you. These are going to harm you. AZT is rarely used. That's not true. That is not true. AZT is still used. All right. Anyway, you know what? One of these days we're going to watch the H-bomber video, probably on vaccines. I think it's a great video. Let me be clear. let me be clear. I have acknowledged the problems with AZT and how it was not the cure for AIDS, but I think it is very important to separate that from the belief that AZT AZT was responsible for people dying during the AIDS epidemic, like the misinformation about AZT. And how AZT is like not something that would only be used on its own. And sure, tons of side effects. The truth is that yes, there are plenty of drugs that, that have side effects. Like you even look at, chemotherapy and radiation and all of the side effects from something like that, but it is still what is used to treat cancer. And like, would you say that, one day we will be advanced to the point that we'll look back on chemotherapy and be like, Jesus Christ, I can't believe that was what we had to offer people. But it's a good thing when drugs advance, when treatments advance. And yet there are still a lot of ailments and a lot of diseases that, unfortunately, what we have to treat them does produce awful side effects. And that's why a lot of times they'll use them in a cocktail, right? Where it's like, okay, we've got this drug, which then will hopefully counteract the side effects of this one. And we take this one in this dosage because it does help with this, but then it's going to like do that. You're weighing whether the potential side effects and the risk of them happening is worse than the certain death that AIDS was at the time. Right. And what Woody was doing is he was ascribing his friends who were dying from AIDS to that they were dying from this drug that was the only thing available at the time. I visited Ellis Island's medical ward on Sunday. They used to treat the scalp disease of incoming patients by shaving their hair, pouring tar in their heads, tearing it off, and then using pine sol to buff after repeat. Standard of care can and should upgrade over time with research and knowledge. And I am like, that seems common sense, right? I feel like everybody understands. I feel like everybody would get that. And yet now here we are, and we can't have these conversations. Like, we're struggling to have these conversations because people are just they are so deeply distrustful of all science.